Lieutenant Mara Quinn stood at attention in the center of the debriefing chamber, her uniform still marked with dust and scorch stains from the mission she had just returned from. The room hummed with tension, filled with officers who avoided her eyes, pretending to analyze their tablets while secretly waiting for Admiral Rourke to enter. He was a man known across the fleet for his cold precision, someone who believed emotions only weakened discipline. And when he finally stepped through the doors, the atmosphere snapped into a rigid silence. Rourke didn't waste a second. He walked straight to the center podium, his eyes sharp, his jaw tight. And before Mara could even salute properly, he launched into a harsh reprimand. He accused her of poor judgment, of reckless tactics, of endangering the fleet's position. His voice echoed against the metallic walls as he listed every failure he believed she had made. Each word landed like a blow, but Mara kept her expression steady, her hands clasped behind her back, her breathing slow and controlled. No one else in the room dared to speak. They all assumed Mara had lost her composure during the mission, that she had made a mistake she was too ashamed to defend. To them, this was the fall of an officer who had once been promising. But only Mara knew the real truth hidden beneath her uniform, a truth she had every intention of keeping to herself. As the Admiral continued, he paced around her like a judge preparing a sentence. He demanded to know why the mission had failed, why communications had dropped, why she had returned late and alone from the final sector. Mara opened her mouth once, then closed it again, choosing silence over explanation, choosing responsibility over excuses. Rourke interpreted that silence as guilt, as weakness, as a sign of an officer who had cracked under pressure rather than risen to meet it. Finally, with a dismissive wave, he suspended her from upcoming fleet operations. He told her she needed to reflect on what it meant to be part of the Admiralty's forces. He told her she was lucky he wasn't recommending disciplinary review. Mara only nodded once, firmly but quietly, her face unreadable. The Admiral left the room convinced he had handled the situation correctly. He believed he had reprimanded a soldier who faltered when it mattered most. He believed he had been confronting incompetence, not sacrifice. But as Mara walked out, her posture straight, despite the pain burning beneath her uniform, a few officers caught a flicker in her eyes. Something tired, something heavy, something unspoken, and one of them whispered under their breath, "The Admiral has no idea who he's dealing with." The medbay lights flickered softly as Lieutenant Mara Quinn stepped inside, moving with the stiffness of someone trying not to reveal just how much pain she carried. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and metal, a quiet sanctuary compared to the harsh voices of the debriefing chamber. As soon as the door slid shut behind her, the mask she had held so firmly in front of Admiral Rourke began to crack. Her breathing hitched, her hand pressed against her side, and the strain she had been hiding since the mission finally showed in her eyes. The medic on duty, an older woman named Dr. Halen, looked up from her station the moment Mara entered. One glance was enough. Her eyes sharpened in concern as she hurried forward. Mara tried to wave her off, insisting it was nothing more than fatigue. But Halen had treated enough soldiers to recognize the lie instantly, without waiting for permission. She guided Mara to the examination table, her voice firm but gentle. Mara hesitated only a moment before unfastening the side of her uniform, revealing the truth she had hidden from the Admiral. A deep, jagged burn stretched across her ribs, darkened with bruising and partially reopened from movement. It wasn't the kind of wound a soldier walked away from easily, let alone endured through hours of reprimand and silence. Dr. Halen hissed under her breath, demanding to know how Mara was still standing. As Halen worked quickly, Mara's mind drifted back to the mission, to the collapsing corridor filled with smoke and plasma fire. She remembered the screams of the trapped squad, the falling debris, the way she had thrown herself between them and the blast. She had dragged 3 injured soldiers through the chaos, shielding them with her own body every time sparks erupted around them. Her injury had come when a structural beam gave way, slicing across her side as she forced the last soldier through an emergency hatch. She could have reported her condition immediately, but doing so would have triggered a formal review, one that would question her squad's decisions and expose them to disciplinary consequences they didn't deserve. Mara chose silence instead, choosing to bear the blame to protect them, choosing to accept humiliation so her team wouldn't face interrogation. Dr. Halen cleaned the wound, her hands steady, but her voice trembling with anger that Mara had been berated in that condition. She warned Mara she needed surgery, rest, and strict monitoring. Mara simply shook her head, saying she couldn't risk drawing attention to her squad. Halen looked at her with a mix of awe and frustration. murmuring that no one, not even an admiral, should mistake such quiet endurance for weakness. And as Mara pulled her uniform back over the bandages, her jaw set with determination, the truth hung heavy in the air. She wasn't hiding fear, she was hiding sacrifice. A sacrifice the Admiral never saw, but one that defined the warrior she truly was. Rumors travel faster than light aboard a military fleet, and within hours the story began to spread in quiet fragments, whispered between engineers, medics, and soldiers who had caught glimpses of Lieutenant Mara Quinn slipping into the medbay with a stiffness that didn't match exhaustion. No one spoke loudly, no one dared question anything officially, but the tension surrounding her name began to shift. Subtle but undeniable, in the command wing, Admiral Rourke returned to his office feeling justified. He believed the reprimand had been necessary, that discipline had to be upheld regardless of rank or reputation. Yet as he reviewed the mission reports later that night, a faint unease settled over him. Small details didn't align with the conclusions he had drawn so quickly. Why had the comms relay collapsed so suddenly? Why had Mara returned from the final sector alone? Why had her squad refused to give a full account during the initial briefing? He tried to dismiss the doubts, but they kept circling back, needling at his mind until he finally called for follow-up reports. Instead of clarity, he found contradictions. Moments later, a junior officer approached him hesitantly, asking if the Admiral had been informed of Mara's condition. Rourke froze, his voice suddenly sharp as he demanded more information. But the officer stepped back in fear, muttering something about not wanting to disobey medical privacy protocols before hurrying away. In another corner of the ship, one of the soldiers Mara had saved, still limping, still bruised, finally gathered his courage. He approached the senior command sergeant and confessed everything. The collapsing hull, the failing supports, Mara shielding them with her body while plasma fire lit the corridor like a burning world. He explained how she dragged them one by one through smoke so thick they could barely breathe, how she refused to abandon them even when she was hit, how she ordered them not to report her injury because she didn't want anyone punished for decisions made under chaos and fear. The sergeant listened with widening eyes, then marched straight to the Admiral's office without hesitation. His voice was low but steady as he relayed the soldier's account, and with every word, Rourke felt his own confidence splintering. His reprimand, his accusations, his cold dismissal, they all collapsed under the weight of the truth. He had mistaken loyalty for incompetence, sacrifice for failure, silence for weakness. By the time the sergeant finished speaking, the Admiral's face had gone pale, a deep guilt settling into the lines around his eyes. He dismissed the man with a curt nod, but the moment the door closed, he stood abruptly, knocking over a stack of data pads in his haste. He needed to find Mara, not as a superior seeking answers, but as a man who realized he had judged a warrior without ever seeing the battlefield she had truly fought. And worst of all, he might already be too late. The training deck was nearly empty when Admiral Rourke finally found Lieutenant Mara Quinn. She stood alone beneath the dim overhead lights, her breath sharp and uneven as she forced her body through a combat sequence that would have challenged even an uninjured soldier. Sweat glistened down her temple, her movements powerful but strained. Each strike she threw carried the weight of someone trying to outrun the pain tearing through her side, trying to stay in control of a body that had already endured too much. Rourke stopped several meters away, his chest tightening at the sight. For the first time, he didn't see a subordinate to discipline. He saw a warrior pushing herself beyond the limits of human will. He opened his mouth to call out to her, but before he could speak, Mara stumbled, her knee buckled, her hand shot to her ribs, and she dropped to one side with a quiet gasp she couldn't suppress. He moved without thinking, crossing the distance in seconds, catching her just before she hit the ground. Mara tensed in his arms, more out of instinct than fear, her eyes flashing with embarrassment and stubborn pride. Rourke guided her carefully to sit against the training wall, his voice softer than anyone had heard from him in years, as he demanded to see the injury she had been hiding. For a moment she resisted, clinging to the silence she'd chosen since the mission, the silence that protected her squad. But the strain in her body betrayed her. With trembling fingers, she lifted the edge of her uniform, revealing the deep burn and bruising Dr. Halen had fought desperately to treat earlier. The wound looked raw and angry, the kind that reopened easily, the kind that demanded rest she clearly had refused. Rourke inhaled sharply, shock and guilt crashing together in his chest. He had reprimanded this woman, suspended her, humiliated her, all while she carried an injury that should have put her in the medbay for days. He knelt beside her, his voice low as he asked why she hadn't reported it. why she had stayed silent even when he accused her of failing her mission. Mara met his eyes with that same quiet steadiness she had held from the beginning. She explained in calm, clipped breaths that reporting the injury would have triggered a formal review of her squad's actions. She didn't want them blamed, didn't want them doubted. They had fought hard. They had made the right choices under impossible conditions, and she refused to let her own wound become the reason they were punished. Rourke felt something inside him shift as he listened, an uncomfortable weight settling into his chest. He realized she had accepted blame he never should have placed on her, and she had done it willingly, not out of weakness, but out of fierce loyalty to the people she led. He told her quietly that he had been wrong, that he had misjudged her completely. Then, after a long moment, he offered her a place in a critical upcoming mission, one that required not just skill, but the kind of courage she had already proven beyond doubt. And for the first time since her return, Mara allowed herself to breathe, not in relief, but in recognition that someone finally saw the warrior she truly was. The dawn hung softly over the fleet hangar as Lieutenant Mara Quinn stepped forward, the faint hum of engines vibrating beneath her boots. Her side was still bandaged, still tender, but her stride had regained something the Admiral hadn't noticed before. Purpose. Not the quiet, obedient purpose she had carried when she first entered his command, but the steady, controlled confidence of someone who had finally stopped hiding who she truly was. She had spent the previous night in the medbay receiving accelerated treatment, not because she asked for it, but because Admiral Rourke had personally ordered it, the medics whispered among themselves, stunned that the Admiral, who rarely showed emotion, had stayed beside her cot. Reviewing mission data, while keeping an eye on her vitals, it wasn't favoritism, it wasn't guilt alone. It was the realization that he had almost let one of the fleet's finest warriors slip through his fingers unseen. Now, standing on the launch platform, Mara found herself surrounded by soldiers and officers preparing for the fleet's most dangerous counter-operation yet. This mission required precision, courage, and leadership, and Rourke had chosen her to stand at its front, not out of obligation, but because he finally understood what she had been carrying all along. As she approached the briefing deck, the room fell quiet. Conversations faded into stunned silence as every eye turned toward her. Some soldiers saw the bandages beneath her gear and felt a wave of respect. Others remembered the rumors, the sacrifice, the quiet strength she never flaunted. The hush that spread wasn't fear, it was acknowledgement, as if they were seeing her for the first time without the haze of assumption or rumor. Admiral Rourke stepped forward and addressed the room before she could speak. His voice carried none of the sharp coldness from days before. Instead, it held something heavier, something earned. He announced her reinstatement not with the usual clipped formality, but with clear conviction. He told the fleet that Lieutenant Mara Quinn had demonstrated leadership of the highest form, that she had risked everything for her squad, that she had shown the kind of loyalty no rulebook could teach. And then he said something that surprised even her. "I did not underestimate her skill," he said quietly. "I underestimated her heart." During the mission that followed, Mara moved through the battlefield like someone born for it, leading with clarity, saving lives with instinct sharpened by experience and pain. When the Admiral's station came under unexpected attack, it was Mara who tore through debris and fire to reach him, her movements precise and unhesitating, despite the wound that had nearly ended her days before. When the battle ended, and the flagship stood victorious, Rourke looked at her not as a subordinate, but as the warrior who had redefined his understanding of strength. She didn't smile, she didn't boast, she simply nodded. The same quiet nod she had given in the debriefing room. But this time, it wasn't a mask. It was acknowledgement, mutual and unspoken, and throughout the fleet. Her story grew, not of a wounded officer reprimanded unfairly, but of a woman who bore her scars without complaint, who fought through pain without applause, who taught even an admiral that true warriors don't reveal their strength until the moment it's needed most.